Yeah, when do we really, when you need to, when do we really,
on the 9th of May, May 9th.
yeah, it's, yeah.
The day before Yom Ha'atzmaut.
What?
The day before Yom Ha'atzmaut.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Last week we discussed the knowledge of the Talmudic sages in Torah, but very briefly, so I'd like to review it today and continue the subject. The fundamental issue is that the contents of the Torah, scientific knowledge, is not part of the Torah Shabbat Peh, was not delivered to the Jewish people. There are opinions that it's hinted at in the written Torah, but it certainly is not accessible to us. On the other hand, scientific knowledge is very important to Judaism, so the Torah obligates us to study science. This is a fact. I cited a statement by Jacob Barceloni.
Which one?
And
Which one? Barcelona?
of Jacob Barceloni. He wrote as follows.
When did he live and where did he live?
He lived about 700 years ago.
Where? In Spain?
But, yeah,
Did you write for him or is he commentary or?
he's known also for the Haskama that he gave to a very important sefer, Halacha sefer.
Which sefer?
He wants to read it to us now.
And,
What sefer is the Diri Haskama?
I remember the Halacha sefer, maybe it'll come to me. Sorry. Yeah, what he says, I have it written down literally here. Every one of the 7 wisdoms is praiseworthy in the eyes of our sages, and they loved it, complete love, and you will never find anywhere in any Akada in the world, not in the Talmudic, in the Babylonian Talmud, not in Jerusalem Talmud, nor in any Midrash, that they criticized science.
What are the 7 wisdoms?
And,
What are the 7 wisdoms?
oh, the 7 wisdoms. There are various opinions. They called it 7 wisdoms. That included mathematics and astronomy and medicine. Even music is included, and biology. The various authorities have different lists. Yeah. So that is certainly known. There are people who say that you can get all the science out of the Torah, but it's very unlikely to be true. And even Ramban, who says that all the science is hinted at in the words of the Torah, he himself was unable to deduce it from the Torah, and he cites non-Jewish sources for scientific facts. Where did they get their scientific knowledge from? The sages. They got it either by observation, they themselves made scientific observations, collected scientific knowledge. I have examples of that in the Talmud. I gave the example of the question came out, if a chicken that lost all its feathers, is it treifa? That if it cannot live for a year, then it's considered treifa. So Shimon ben Chalafta took a chicken like that, covered it with a warm cloth, put it in a warm oven, and it grew feathers, he grew the feathers. That's how he proved that a chicken that lost its feathers is not treifa. Then that is one source. Another source is from non-Jewish sources. For instance, in the question of kilayim, how much space you have to leave between various plants that they not considered mingling. You're not allowed to mingle plants. How far apart? So he says that we learned, the Chachomim learned from the Chori, who were experts in agriculture and knew exactly proper spacing. So those are the two main sources of scientific knowledge of the Chachamim. There's one example that I know I gave that was deduced from the Torah, from the written Torah, the gestation period of the snake. Remember,
There are 7 years.
Interesting example. Then we went that the Chachamim were ahead of their time, up to date, completely up to date in scientific methods, because it was very important to them. They were even ahead of their time in some cases. One example I gave was a comet. Comets, of course, were known thousands of years, but the comets, that they circle the sun and come back, that was generally not known. But I gave an example of Rabbi Yoshua, who said that he prepared food for a long period of time when they went overseas. Rabbi asked him how come we were aware of that we might need the extra food. So Yeshua said there is one star that comes every 70 years, and that is apt to mislead the sailors, so they lose their way. And normally history gives credit to Halley for discovering the Halley's comet, that it repeats itself every little less than 70 years, and more than 70 years. And that was already known by some of the sages, that the earth is flat or round. There are divided opinions in the Talmud. In any case, we find many things the Chachamim are not only knowledgeable, they were even a bit ahead of their time. In some cases, they seem to contradict scientific knowledge. I gave one example that the hare and the rabbit were listed as malekera, as chewing their cud. That was considered a major mistake. But then, 150 years ago, they discovered that they have two types of feces, and they have to have the food go through their intestinal tract twice in order to get the nutrients. So that is restricted to the hares and the rabbits. So then it turns out that there is a mistake. Another thing, the age of the world, which was accepted to be infinite, and the Torah, according to the Torah, it's limited to 6,000 years. And then they found fossil records that go way back before then. and that was considered as contradicting the Torah. Comes Tiferet Israel, is a major commentary on the Mishnah, the large Mishnayot that are the 12 volume ones. There's a major commentary there. He has an article in there where he says that the sages said that God created worlds and destroyed them. And he says these fossil records that we have are from the earlier worlds. Yes.
So, how should we treat these creatures, maybe human creatures?
Yes. He mentions that even human remnants from earlier worlds, those are, he says that the sages discussed in 974 generations that lived before the creation of our world. So the way he interprets scripture, when it says at the beginning, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, beginning God created heaven and earth, it was a long, long time ago. It doesn't say how long, but very long time ago. The world was in a state of chaos and emptiness that refers to the destruction of our previous world, and out of the destruction of the previous world, our world developed. That's how he interprets the scripture. So he uses science in order to help us understand what the Torah is saying. It's a very interesting example. Yes.
So the halacha goes back to the former world or just to this world? For instance, if we find bones of human beings,
I
should
don't know
we?
that. It's important. I don't think it's relevant. It doesn't interest me.
What's about it?
But who cares?
Today we care if we find bones and they are Jewish. It's very important.
How do you know? Fossil records, how do you know whether they're Jewish?
I don't know, how do they know that they are find here? I mean, they are always in Ashdod, Ashkelon in the
You
hospital.
don't even know whether it was really a human being. It looked like a human being, that the bones, whatever the fossil remains, looked like a human remains. You're not sure that they were humans. They may have been kind of apes.
So, okay,
So that's really not relevant. There's no way of knowing, and it really isn't important either, I think. You think it's important, you have to read it. But if it's known, I don't think you'll find anything.
If they would recover the DNA from the bones
Yeah.
and clone something, you would find out.
no, but that's,
You find out whether they were human, that you can find out. Whether they're Jewish, I don't think you can find out.
no, but it's still a question. If it's human,
Yes.
then should we treat these humans as humans today, which are not non-Jewish?
Judaism really started only at Matan Torah. Avraham Avinu loved God and he kept all the mitzvot, but strictly speaking, he was not Jewish. There was no Judaism until the Torah was given. That was over 3,000 years, 3,300 years ago. Till then, there was no Judaism.
No, but
Now,
should,
I want to give some more examples where there seem to be contradictions between the Torah and scientific knowledge. Some of them come because nature has changed. Okay, one example I gave is that, it gets too complicated, but let's skip that. Let's take an example where the Torah seems to contradict scientific knowledge. And that is that on Shabbat, you're not allowed to kill an animal.